My name is Isabella Carter. I am 23 years old, a part-time bookstore clerk in Portland, Maine. And until that night I thought I had learned every way my parents could hurt me. But nothing prepared me for the moment my father's fist crashed into my jaw, the crack echoing through our perfect kitchen. I remember the taste of blood, the cold tile under my cheek, and my mother's laugh slicing through the ringing in my ears. "Now you'll learn to keep that gutter mouth shut," she said, as if my broken face was a lesson I deserved. She thought I would stay down. They both did. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and if you believe in turning pain into power, subscribe. This is the story of how I took everything they used to break me and turned it into the very thing that destroyed them. The air in our kitchen that night was heavy, suffocating in a way that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The old ceiling fan spun lazily above us, its weak breeze stirring the scent of overcooked garlic and the faint, expensive perfume my mother always wore, a mix of floral sweetness and something bitter underneath. She sat at the far end of the table, her posture perfect, one manicured hand wrapped around a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. The stem of the glass caught the chandelier's light, throwing shards of gold across the tablecloth. My father, Richard Carter, sat at the head, his favorite position, as though the house were a courtroom and we were all just waiting for his verdict. His cufflinks, silver with a single black stone in each, flashed whenever he moved his hands. They were a gift from a client, something he liked to mention to remind us of his value, his connections, his importance. I sat quietly at my usual spot, the seat between them, where I could feel their eyes on me from both sides. I had learned long ago to measure my breaths during dinner, to choose every word with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. One wrong move and the room would explode. The conversation started harmlessly enough. My father asked about my day at the bookstore, barely disguising his disdain for my part-time job. Kept my answers short, polite. My mother commented on the upcoming charity gala she was planning, describing table arrangements as though the fate of the city depended on them. I nodded in all the right places. But then, between bites of pasta that tasted faintly scorched, my father set down his fork and looked directly at me. "I've spoken to Dean Mitchell at Boston Law," he said. "He's expecting your application next week. You'll be starting in the fall." My stomach tightened. I forced myself to chew, to swallow before answering. "I haven't accepted Boston Law." My voice was calm, steady. "I got into New York University. For journalism." Silence. Not the kind that drifts into a room when a conversation pauses naturally. This was a drop, a heavy weight that landed in the middle of the table and cracked the air open. My father's eyes narrowed just slightly, but the shift was enough to make my pulse quicken. "You will not," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "throw away your future chasing some dying field. Journalism is for people who can't do anything else. You will study law." My hands curled into fists under the table. "I don't want to be a lawyer." The words were out before I could stop them. The change was instantaneous. His chair scraped sharply across the tile as he stood. I saw the flash of his cufflink before his hand connected with my jaw. The sound was sickening, an echo that seemed too loud for our small kitchen. Pain bloomed instantly, white-hot and blinding, radiating across my face. I stumbled backward, my hip catching the corner of the counter. My mouth filled with the metallic taste of blood. My vision blurred, spots dancing in the edges of my sight. And then, over the ringing in my ears, came my mother's laugh. Not a nervous chuckle or a startled reaction, but a cold, deliberate laugh. She leaned against the doorway, wine glass balanced easily in her hand, and her voice slid through the air like a knife. "Now you'll learn to keep that gutter mouth shut." My knees gave out. The cold tile rose up to meet my cheek, the coolness almost soothing against the fire in my jaw. I could hear my father's breathing, steady, measured, like this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience to him. He adjusted his cuffs, straightened his tie. "Clean yourself up," he said, as if giving a courtroom instruction. "In the morning, we'll proceed with the Boston University enrollment." They both left me there. My mother drifted upstairs, her heels clicking softly, her wine glass still half full. My father disappeared into his study, closing the door with a finality that said the matter was settled. The kitchen was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Every second felt stretched, pulled thin by the weight of the pain throbbing in my jaw. I tried to swallow but could barely move my mouth. Something was wrong, something deep and grinding inside the bone. I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours. The cool tile was the only relief, grounding me while the rest of my body pulsed with shock. I thought about standing, about getting ice, but even the idea of movement felt impossible. Eventually I forced myself upright, using the counter for balance. My reflection in the kitchen window was ghostly in the dim light. One side of my face already swelling, my lower lip split. I turned toward the hallway, moving slowly, each step sending a ripple of pain through my jaw and ribs. The house felt enormous in that moment. Each shadow stretched long, each corner holding the possibility of another blow. I passed the closed door of my father's study and quickened my pace, careful not to make noise. Upstairs, my mother's faint humming floated from the bedroom, accompanied by the clink of her glass setting down on the nightstand. When I finally reached my room, I shut the door quietly and locked it. I sat on the edge of my bed, the pressure in my face building like a drumbeat. I couldn't cry. The act of sobbing would have sent a new wave of pain tearing through my jaw. Instead, I just breathed slow, shallow breaths, until my heart stopped racing. In the drawer of my nightstand was a small notebook. It had been hidden there for months, under a stack of school papers, its pages filled with dates, descriptions, small sketches. Tonight, for the first time, I wrote about the pain in precise detail. The sound of the impact, the exact words my mother used, the way my father's hands looked when he straightened his cuffs afterward. I had started the notebook months ago as a way to survive, but tonight it became something else. Not just a place to spill thoughts I couldn't say aloud, but a record. Proof. I didn't know it yet, but this was the first entry in what would become my most dangerous possession. And somewhere, buried beneath the pain and the fear, a new thought began to form. It was sharp, cold, and unwavering. They believed they had put me in my place, but they had just given me the first real reason to fight back. Morning came slowly, the light creeping in through the thin gap in my curtains. The first thing I felt was the ache. Deep, pulsing, relentless. I tried to move my jaw and was met with a grinding sensation that made my stomach turn. Every muscle in my face seemed to protest at once. I lay still for a while, listening to the muffled sounds of the house. My father's heavy footsteps crossed the hallway, followed by the low murmur of his voice on a call. My mother's sharper tone chimed in from the kitchen, giving instructions to someone, probably the cleaning service. Their lives were continuing as if the night before had never happened. When I finally got up, I avoided the bathroom mirror. I didn't need to see the damage to know how bad it was. My tongue could feel the swelling inside my mouth, the rough split in my lip, the misaligned teeth pressing in strange angles. Downstairs, the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread hit me. My mother was at the counter, arranging strawberries in a bowl like she was styling a magazine photo shoot. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Make yourself something soft," she said, her tone flat. "We have a lunch at 1, and I don't want you looking worse than you already do." I poured myself a glass of water, ignoring the coffee pot. Swallowing was difficult enough without burning my throat. My father appeared from the hallway, his suit perfectly pressed, his tie knotted with the precision of someone who cared about details. "Be ready to go by 10, he said. "We'll finalize your enrollment after the meeting." I didn't answer. I just nodded once and took my water back upstairs. In the privacy of my room, I sat on the floor with my notebook. My jaw throbbed with each beat of my heart, but I forced myself to write. I described everything. The way my father's voice dropped before the first strike, the sharpness of my mother's laugh, the smell of his cologne when he stood over me. I even noted the clock on the wall reading 8:46 when it happened. After I finished, I slid the notebook back into its hiding spot under the loose floorboard near my bed. My father had never noticed the small gap, and I had learned to replace the wood so it looked untouched. For the next few days, I barely spoke. The pain made conversation almost impossible, and silence was safer. My father seemed content with my sudden quietness, mistaking it for obedience. My mother didn't ask questions, but silence gave me space to think. I thought about Hannah Lee, my only real friend since middle school. She had been the first person to see the cracks in my life, though I had never told her the full truth. She knew enough to sense danger when I disappeared for days or showed up at school with bruises covered poorly by makeup. I needed to reach her. But my father had taken my phone after the argument, locking it in his office. Any attempt to get it back would draw suspicion. On the third day, an opportunity came. My mother asked me to return some library books she had borrowed for an event. "And do not take all day," she said, tossing me the keys to her car. The library felt like another world, quiet, safe, untouched by the rules of my house. I walked straight past the front desk to the row of public computers in the back. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed in the email address I remembered from years ago, one we had made in 7th grade for trading stories and inside jokes. "Hannah, it's me. I need to talk to you. Can't explain now. Check this email every day." I hit send before I could second guess it. That night, while my parents were downstairs watching television, I logged into the library's email portal again from my mother's laptop, something she rarely used and never password protected. Hannah's reply was already there. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here. No questions." Reading those words felt like taking the first full breath in days. Over the next week, I began to piece together an idea. Not a plan, not yet. But the edges of something that could be one. I would need proof, something undeniable, something that couldn't be brushed off as exaggeration or lies. The first step was to document. In the storage closet near the laundry room, I found an old digital camera, dusty but functional. Every night after my parents went to bed, I took photos. Close-ups of my jaw from different angles. The split in my lip. The faint green and yellow bruises blooming under my skin as the days passed. Each image was saved to a folder buried deep in the camera's memory card, renamed with harmless labels like Garden Under 4 and Sunset Under 5. I started recording too. One afternoon, when my father berated me for not folding the laundry fast enough, I pressed the tiny record button on the device hidden in my pocket. Later I played it back, hearing his voice without the usual fog of adrenaline in my ears. "You think you can defy me again, and it won't end worse than last time. Try it." Hearing it like that, without the heat of the moment, made my skin crawl. It also hardened my resolve. Each day, I grew more certain that I couldn't just run. I had to make sure that when I left, they couldn't follow. I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. I wanted an ending that would lock the door behind me forever. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I imagined it. The look on my father's face when the facade cracked in front of everyone who believed he was a good man. I imagined my mother's smile fading, the glass of wine slipping from her hand. The thought didn't scare me, kept me warm in the dark. The pain in my jaw dulled over the next 2 weeks, but it never really left. Sometimes it was a heavy ache that made my head throb, other times a sharp twinge when I tried to chew or laugh. I avoided mirrors as much as possible. Every time I caught my reflection, it reminded me of that night. The cold tile, the metallic taste of blood, my mother's laugh. My father seemed convinced I had learned my lesson. His voice was almost cordial at breakfast, though his eyes still carried that calculating look, as if measuring how far he could push me before I cracked again. My mother spoke little, except to comment on my posture, my clothes, or the way I walked into a room. I spoke even less. It made it easier to listen. And listening became my quiet weapon. One evening, as I passed the study on my way upstairs, I heard my father's voice through the half-open door. "I told you no one needs to know where I was that weekend," he said sharply. "We keep this between us." There was a pause, then his tone softened in a way I had never heard at home. "Don't worry, I'll see you again soon." I stopped breathing for a moment. My father didn't talk like that to anyone except my mother. At least, not that I had ever heard. The next morning, when they left for a brunch, I slipped into the study. I moved carefully, touching nothing until I found the desk drawer that was slightly ajar. Inside was a stack of receipts, envelopes, and a thin leather-bound notebook. Most of it looked like normal work papers, until I saw a hotel bill dated 2 months earlier. The address was a luxury hotel downtown. The charges were for 2 guests, champagne, room service, breakfast for 2. He had told my mother he was in Chicago that weekend. I didn't take the receipt. I didn't need to, not yet. I slid it back exactly as I found it and left the room with my pulse hammering. That night, in my notebook under the floorboard, I wrote down the hotel's name, the dates, and the exact charges. I didn't know if it would ever be useful, but it felt like another brick in the wall I was building between myself and them. Over the next few days, I began to move differently. I walked into rooms as if I belonged there. I left the house for short errands without asking permission, just long enough to see if they would notice. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. When my mother sent me to the grocery store one afternoon, I took a detour. Hannah was waiting at the coffee shop near the edge of town, her hair pulled back, her eyes searching for me the second I walked in. "You look bad," she said quietly, her voice catching. "I've been worse," I said, though it wasn't really true. We sat in the back corner, out of sight from the windows. I slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "My email. Check it every day. I can't risk calling or texting." She nodded, slipping it into her pocket. "What do you need?" "A place to keep some things. Small stuff, important stuff. And..." I hesitated, glancing at the other customers. "When the time comes, a ride." Hannah's jaw tightened, but she didn't ask questions. Done. The relief I felt in that moment was almost enough to make me cry. Over the next week, I began moving pieces of my life out of the house in small, hidden ways. Few favorite books. My journals. The shell from Cape Cod I had kept since I was 12. I wrapped each item in old scarves or sweaters, placing them in a canvas tote. Whenever I had an errand, I took one bag and passed it to Hannah, who would drop it at her parents' guest room. Meanwhile, the photos and recordings kept piling up. I labeled them in a way only I would understand. Dates disguised as meaningless numbers, conversations hidden among blank files. The first real break came from Mrs. Green, my old English teacher. She ran a summer writing workshop at the community center, and I knew she would be there every Tuesday afternoon. I waited until the last student left, then stepped inside. Her smile faded when she saw me. "Isabella, what happened to your face?" For a second I wanted to lie. To tell her it was nothing. But something in her expression, the way her brow furrowed, the way her voice softened, pulled the truth out of me. I told her everything. Not just about the broken jaw, but about the years before it. The curfews. The bruises. The control. My mother's laughter. By the time I finished, her hands were clenched around the edge of the desk. "You can't stay there," she said. "I know," I whispered. Mrs. Green connected me to Lauren Mitchell, a lawyer who specialized in domestic abuse cases. Lauren had a quiet strength about her, the kind that made you feel safe even while discussing the worst moments of your life. She studied my photos, listened to my recordings, and read through my notes. "You've done more to prepare than most adults in your situation," she said. "With this evidence, we can file for a restraining order. You're 18. You don't need their permission to leave." "Not yet," I said. "If I leave now, they'll find me. I need to make sure they can't follow." She didn't argue. Instead, she began helping me build a plan, step by step, deadline by deadline. As I walked home that evening, the sun low in the sky, I realized something had shifted. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. The seed of escape had been planted, and I was done waiting for permission to let it grow. The next morning began like so many others. My father at the head of the table with the paper folded neatly beside his coffee, my mother dressed as if she were hosting a fashion editorial instead of making toast. The only sound was the dull scrape of knife against butter, and yet every movement felt loaded. I sat in my usual place, sipping tea through a straw so the warmth wouldn't send sharp pain through my still-healing jaw. My father glanced at me once, then returned to the financial section, uninterested. That was good. When he was indifferent, I could breathe. Inside, though, my mind was moving quickly. The night before, I had spread everything I had collected, photos, recordings, my notebook entries, across my bedroom floor. I studied them like a detective piecing together a case file. Every bruise had a date. Every recording had context. Each incident built on the last. It was no longer just a collection of moments. It was a pattern. But a pattern wasn't enough. I needed people in my corner. People who could see it and act before my father had the chance to twist the story. Hannah was my first safety anchor. She had already moved nearly a dozen small bags from my house to her parents' guest room. Everything important I couldn't risk losing was there. Documents, my journals, the shell from Cape Cod, the camera's memory card. Mrs. Green became the second. She didn't just listen, she acted. After our first meeting, she began researching organizations that specialized in helping young adults escape abusive households. She even contacted a former colleague in New York who worked at NYU's journalism department, quietly inquiring about late admissions. Then there was Lauren Mitchell. Every time we met, she treated my evidence not like the diary of a scared teenager, but like the groundwork of a solid case. She showed me how to back up files to encrypted cloud storage using the library computers, and how to store duplicates on separate drives in case one went missing. You need layers, she told me during our second meeting. Never keep the only copy of anything in one place. You want redundancy. If one layer is destroyed, another survives. So I built layers. The original memory card stayed at Hannah's house. One copy of everything was uploaded to a secure drive Lauren had access to. Another copy went into a small flash drive I wore on a thin chain under my shirt. I kept that one hidden even from Hannah. But every step forward came with new risk. One afternoon, while taking laundry upstairs, I heard my father's voice coming from his study. "I don't care what it takes. Shut that investigation down," he said sharply. There was a pause then. If this gets out, it's not just my career, it's my entire reputation. Froze. My father had never sounded afraid before. That evening, Lauren explained it. He's under quiet investigation by the Bar Association for financial misconduct. If your case surfaces now, it could tip the balance. It also means he's more dangerous than ever. People in his position often lash out when they feel their control slipping. Her warning stayed with me. It meant my window for action was smaller than I had thought. I started to prepare for moments I couldn't predict. I rehearsed how to leave quickly if I had to, where my shoes would be, which exit to use, how to move without making noise on the stairs. I kept an old hoodie and a small bag with cash and toiletries under my bed, just in case. The tension at home was shifting too. My father was shorter in his responses, more impatient with small mistakes. My mother's drinking worsened. She would oscillate between a glassy-eyed sort of kindness, slipping me extra food when she thought he wasn't looking, and sharp, cutting remarks about how I was not as special as I thought. One night, she stood in my doorway holding a half-empty wine glass. "He won't tolerate another outburst from you," she said. "If you just do what you're told, you could have an easy life here." I didn't answer. "You think you're better than us," she continued, her voice slurring slightly. "But you're just like me. You'll never leave him." She was wrong. 2 days later, Hannah and I met at the library. I gave her the final bag of items to store. She looked at me carefully. "It's close, isn't it?" "Closer than they think," I said. After she left, I sat at one of the computers and opened an email from Mrs. Green. The subject line was a single word, confirmed. Inside was the message. "NYU journalism program will accept you for the fall semester under emergency admission. Partial scholarship approved." My hands trembled as I read it again and again. I had a place to go. The escape net was ready. All that remained was choosing the moment to pull it tight. And I already knew when that moment would come. It came to me while I was washing dishes, the warm water running over my hands as I stared out the kitchen window at the perfect lawn my father insisted be mowed every Saturday. He was in the living room on the phone with one of his colleagues, his voice booming with the easy confidence he used in public. My mother was upstairs, her heels clicking back and forth as she prepared for an event. I dried my hands slowly, thinking of the calendar on the wall near the pantry. A week from now was my father's birthday. Every year he threw a party, not for himself but for the performance. The guest list always included law partners, influential friends, and select neighbors. People whose opinions mattered to him in a way mine never did. A room full of witnesses. People he wanted to impress. People who thought he was untouchable. That would be the night. I didn't write it down anywhere. The less physical evidence, the better. Instead, I told Lauren during our next meeting at the library. She nodded slowly, her pen tapping against her notebook. Good, she said. With that many people present, his reaction will be limited. I'll have the restraining order ready to file that evening. The week before the party was the longest of my life. Every interaction felt like walking a tightrope. I had to play the role perfectly. Obedient daughter, quiet, respectful, predictable. I cooked when my mother told me to. I listened to my father's lectures without a single word back. Kept my tone even, my face neutral. But under the surface, my mind was moving constantly. I made a final run to the library to check my email. Hannah had replied to my last message with just 2 words. All ready. The guest room at her parents' house was prepared, my belongings safely stored. Mrs. Green had confirmed my travel arrangements. A friend of hers who lived in the city would drive me from Hannah's to New York the morning after the party. I backed up my files one last time, creating duplicates of the duplicates. One flash drive went to Lauren. Another stayed with Hannah. The one I wore under my shirt remained in its place. The small, cool weight against my chest a constant reminder of what I was carrying. At night, I lay awake in the dark, running through every step. When to leave the table. When to speak. How to move to the television without giving him time to stop me. 3 days before the party, my mother surprised me by knocking softly on my bedroom door. When I opened it, she stood there holding a blue dress still in its plastic covering from the boutique. Wear this Saturday, she said, her voice flat. It will go with the silver earrings I'll lend you. I took it without speaking. The fabric was soft under my fingers, the kind of thing she would have picked for me when I was a child to match her own outfit. But I wasn't a child anymore. And this dress wouldn't be for her approval. The night before the party, I could barely eat. My father was in his study making calls, my mother pacing the dining room with her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated catering. The house smelled faintly of polish and fresh flowers. I retreated to my room, sitting at my desk with the lamp off, staring out at the quiet street. The neighborhood looked so calm. Joggers passing under the streetlights, sprinklers ticking in the yards. No one would imagine what was about to happen behind the perfect white trim of our house. My jaw still ached faintly when I thought about that night in the kitchen, but now the memory fueled me instead of freezing me. I touched the shell from Cape Cod where it sat in the corner of my desk. The surface was smooth and cool, and it reminded me that even in this house, there had been moments they couldn't ruin. Tomorrow there would be one more. One that would change everything. The day of the party started with perfect weather, the kind my father liked to call good for appearances. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, catching on the polished silver my mother had laid out on the dining table. The smell of fresh flowers filled the house. White lilies in tall glass vases, roses arranged in symmetrical bursts. Everything looked like a magazine spread, staged and pristine. I moved through the house quietly, doing whatever tasks my mother assigned without hesitation. Polish the serving spoons. Fold the cloth napkins. Arrange the wine glasses by height. My voice stayed soft, my steps light. Inside, my thoughts ticked in measured beats. Hours until guests arrived. Hours until I would stop pretending. At noon, my father emerged from his study, dressed in a navy suit with a pale blue tie. He surveyed the room like a judge reviewing evidence. "Make sure the caterers have the hors d'oeuvres ready by 6 sharp," he told my mother, as if she hadn't already confirmed it twice. Then he looked at me. "Keep yourself presentable. You'll greet guests at the door." "Yes, sir," I said evenly. I wore the blue dress my mother had given me, its fabric light against my skin, the hem falling just above my knees. My hair was smoothed over one shoulder, hiding the faint discoloration along my jawline that makeup couldn't fully erase. The flash drive hung under the neckline, hidden by the fabric. By 5:30, the house was humming with activity. Catering staff moved between the kitchen and the dining room, trays balanced carefully in their hands. My mother floated from room to room in a silver dress, checking the placement of candles, adjusting flowers by a fraction of an inch. My father remained in the living room, practicing the warmth in his voice, the smile that never reached his eyes. The first guests arrived at 6 on the dot. His law partner and his wife, carrying a bottle of wine wrapped in gold paper. I opened the door with a polite smile, greeting them by name. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside. More followed, neighbors in tailored suits, family members I only saw at holidays, a few men from the firm who had always looked at me like I was part of the furniture. I played my role to perfection, smiling just enough, speaking only when spoken to, making sure to appear exactly as they believed I should be. Inside, the hours stretched tight. The flash drive under my dress felt heavier with every passing minute. At the dining table, conversation flowed around me. My father sat at the head, commanding the room. His glass raised as he told a story about a recent trial victory. Laughter rippled through the guests, my mother beaming beside him. I glanced at the clock. 8:30. Close enough. When dessert plates were cleared and the room began to shift toward the living area for cake and presents, I slipped away. Upstairs in my room, I retrieved the small silver-wrapped box from the bottom drawer of my desk. It looked like any other gift. Neatly folded paper, a ribbon tied just so. Inside was the flash drive. My pulse steadied as I walked back down the stairs. Every step felt deliberate. My father was standing near the fireplace, surrounded by a cluster of colleagues, a glass of scotch in his hand. When he saw me, he looked mildly surprised. "I have something for you, Dad," I said, holding the box out to him. He smiled for the audience. "Well, this is unexpected." I didn't move as he unwrapped the paper, lifted the lid, and stared at the small black drive inside. "It contains some memories," I said. "I thought you might want to see them." There was a flicker in his eyes, a shift so small most people wouldn't notice. But I saw it. Before he could speak, I turned toward the entertainment center, sliding the drive into the computer connected to the large television. And then my face filled the screen. The photo was dated, taken the night after my jaw was broken. My eye swollen, my lip split, the misalignment of the bone visible even in the still image. A murmur ran through the room. Someone gasped. I clicked to the next image. And the next. The timeline of my injuries scrolled across the screen in silent, damning clarity. Behind me, my father's voice rose. "What is the meaning of this?" But I didn't turn. With one more click, his voice filled the speakers, recorded 3 days after that night. "Try to tell anyone about your little accident, and you won't survive the next one. Do you understand me, you worthless little?" The room went silent except for the sound of his own threat playing back at him. And in that silence, I could feel the performance cracking. My father moved quickly, the smooth confidence he'd worn all evening slipping into something rawer, darker. "Turn that off," he barked, stepping toward me. I didn't move. The next image filled the screen. My swollen jaw 3 days later, fading bruises along my ribs visible under the edge of my shirt. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Enough. Frank, what is going on?" Howard, his senior partner, spoke from somewhere near the dining room archway. His voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Nothing," my father snapped. "These are doctored photos. Edited recordings. My daughter has always been imaginative." Clicked again. Another recording began. His voice, low and venomous. "You will study what I tell you. You will be who I tell you to be." A murmur spread through the room. Eyes shifted, glances passed between guests. My mother's face had gone pale, her hand clutching the back of a chair as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. "Is that why you broke my jaw?" My voice was steady, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Because I wanted to study journalism instead of law?" He released my arm but didn't step back. "Stop this now." The doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. No one moved at first. Then I stepped around him and opened the door. Two uniformed officers stood on the porch, their faces calm but alert. "Officers Ryan and Torres." The woman introduced herself. "We received a call about a potential domestic violence situation at this address." "That would be correct," I said, my voice still even. "I'm Isabella Carter. I made the call earlier." I stepped aside to let them in. The room shifted, people drawing back, the low hum of whispered questions. My father straightened his jacket, trying to reassemble his mask. "This is a mistake," he began. "I'm a well-respected." Officer Ryan held up a hand. "Sir, we need to speak with everyone separately." They moved quickly, dividing the guests, taking statements in different corners of the house. Lauren had prepared me for this. I handed over a duplicate flash drive to Officer Torres along with a small envelope containing printed photos. My mother was led into the kitchen. I could hear her voice rising, a mix of denial and deflection. "She provoked him, she exaggerates, you don't understand." Then a quieter tone, shaking. "I couldn't stop him." My father's voice came from the living room, trying to charm, then to threaten. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I know the commissioner personally." But the officers didn't waver. 20 minutes later, Officer Ryan stepped into the center of the room. "Richard Carter, you are under arrest for domestic assault and battery." She read him his rights clearly, each word cutting through the air. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury as she cuffed his wrists. "You'll regret this," he hissed at me. "You're nothing without this family. Nothing." I stepped closer, meeting his eyes. "No, Dad. You're nothing without your facade. And now everyone can see who you really are." The guests were silent as he was led out the front door, the flashing red and blue lights spilling across the pristine lawn. I closed the door slowly, the sound of the latch clicking louder than it should have been. The party was over. The facade was gone. And for the first time the house felt different. The living room was still filled with guests, but no one spoke. The hum of conversation that had filled the house hours earlier was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. Half-empty wine glasses sat on polished tables, plates of untouched cake sweating under the chandelier light. My mother stood near the staircase, one hand pressed to her forehead, her silver dress shimmering with each unsteady movement. Her eyes flicked to me, but there was no warmth in them, only the look of someone calculating what could still be salvaged. Without a word, she turned and climbed the stairs, her heels tapping out a slow, uneven rhythm until the bedroom door shut upstairs. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. The smell of roses and expensive perfume still clung to the air, but it no longer masked anything. The house felt stripped bare, the walls thinner, the shadows darker. My gaze drifted to the side table near the front door. Sitting there was a plain black tote bag, the one I had hidden in the back of my closet for weeks. Inside were the documents I needed, a change of clothes, the shell from Cape Cod, and the last flash drive containing my evidence. I picked it up slowly, feeling the weight settle in my hand. The sound of an engine outside drew my attention. I stepped to the window and saw Hannah's car parked across the street, her figure leaning against the driver's side, scanning the quiet neighborhood. Her eyes caught mine, and she gave the smallest nod. I walked to the hallway, pausing only once. My father's study door was ajar, the room inside dark and empty. I thought about stepping in, about looking at the desk where so many of his rules had been delivered like verdicts. But there was nothing in there I wanted anymore. At the front door I glanced back. The dining table was still set, the crystal glasses catching the light, the fine china untouched since dessert. The whole scene looked staged, frozen in time, waiting for a version of this family that no longer existed. Goodbye, I thought. Not to the house and not to my parents, but to the person who had lived here. Quiet, cautious, and always waiting for permission to breathe. She wasn't coming with me. I stepped outside into the night air. The crickets were loud in the hedges, the street lamps casting long pools of yellow light across the asphalt. Hannah opened the passenger door before I even reached the car. The moment I slid into the seat, the weight in my chest shifted. It wasn't gone, but it was lighter, as if the first layer had been peeled away. We didn't speak until we were 2 streets over, the house shrinking in the distance. "Everything go as planned?" Hannah asked, her voice low. I nodded. "He's in custody. Lauren will file the order tonight." She didn't push for details. Instead, she drove in silence, the hum of the tires against the road filling the space between us. When we pulled into her driveway, the porch light was on. Her parents were waiting at the door, their faces lined with concern but open, unguarded in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Come inside," her mother said softly. "You're safe here." I followed them in, the warmth of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. Upstairs, in the small guest room, sat the stacks of bags Hannah had been holding for me. My life condensed into a few square feet of space. Tomorrow, we would load them into the back of her friend's car and drive to New York. But tonight, I would sleep without locking my door. I woke before sunrise, the faint light slipping through the thin curtains of Hannah's guest room. For a moment, I didn't move. My body was still expecting the sounds that usually followed waking in my old house. The heavy tread of my father's steps in the hallway, the distant clink of my mother's wine glass, the hum of tension that seemed to live in the walls. But there was nothing, just quiet. I lay there for a few minutes, letting that silence sink in, my mind trying to understand that it wasn't temporary. I wasn't in my room at home, counting down the minutes before someone barged in. I was somewhere they couldn't reach me. Downstairs, I could hear muffled voices, Hannah and her parents in the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted up the stairs. When I came down, Hannah's mom handed me a mug without a word, the warmth seeping into my fingers. "You've got a long day ahead," she said gently. On the table sat a neatly stacked pile of my bags, ready to be carried out. Next to them was a plate of toast and scrambled eggs. My jaw was still sore, so I took small bites, but the food felt like fuel in a way it hadn't in months. By 7, Hannah's friend Dan had pulled up in an old but clean hatchback, the back seats folded down to make room for the bags. He greeted me with a nod, no questions, just the kind of quiet understanding that made me trust him instantly. Loading the car didn't take long. Every bag held pieces of the life I was taking with me. Clothes, the shell from Cape Cod, my journals, the camera, the flash drives. Everything else I'd left behind without a second thought. As Hannah hugged me, she whispered, "Text me as soon as you're there. And if you need me, ever, I'll come." Promised I would. The drive out of town felt unreal. Every street was familiar, every turn held memories, but none of them felt like they belonged to me anymore. As we passed my old neighborhood, I kept my eyes forward. I didn't need to see the house. I knew the curtains would be drawn, the lawn perfectly trimmed, the facade still in place for anyone who didn't know better. 3 hours later, the city skyline appeared on the horizon. The closer we got, the more the streets changed. Wider sidewalks, taller buildings, more people moving in every direction. The air itself felt different, heavier with exhaust and possibility. Dan dropped me off in Brooklyn, outside a narrow brick building with a metal fire escape running up its side. My new apartment, tiny but mine, was on the 3rd floor. The key turned in the lock with a satisfying click. Inside, the space was small enough that I could see every corner from the doorway. A single window looked out over the street, the walls bare except for a few nails left by the previous tenant. The bed was little more than a mattress on a frame, but it was clean. I set my bags down and stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet sink in. No footsteps outside the door. No voices raised in the next room. No one to tell me where I could go or what I could be. It was freedom, but it didn't feel simple. My body still held the tension of years spent bracing for impact. Every sound from the street made my shoulders twitch. That afternoon, I unpacked slowly, finding places for the things that mattered most. The shell went on the windowsill. My journals on the shelf above the bed. The camera in the drawer of the small desk by the wall. As the sun set, the city outside glowed orange and gold. I opened the window and let the sound drift in. Traffic, voices, the faint strains of music from somewhere down the block. Tomorrow I would go to campus and meet with the journalism department. Tomorrow I would start learning how to use my voice the way I had always wanted to. But tonight I just sat by the window, breathing the air of a place where no one knew my name, and no one had power over me. The next morning I left the apartment early, my steps light but cautious. My jaw still ached when I yawned, a stubborn reminder of where I'd been, but I kept my head up as I walked toward the subway. The NYU campus was alive in a way I'd only imagined. Students rushing between classes, the air filled with conversations in a dozen languages, street vendors calling out their menus. No one looked twice at me. I was just another face in the crowd. Inside the journalism building, the scent of fresh paper and coffee hit me. The department chair, a kind-eyed woman named Dr. Morales, greeted me in her office. "We're glad you're here, Isabella," she said, sliding a schedule across the desk. "Your portfolio is strong. You have a voice worth hearing." For a second, I almost couldn't speak. Those words, your voice, felt like they belonged to someone else, someone I was still learning how to be. Classes started the following week. I filled notebooks with ideas, interviewed classmates for small assignments, and stayed late in the computer lab just to be surrounded by the hum of people creating. Outside of school, I began therapy through the university's counseling center. Dr. Patel, my therapist, helped me untangle the knots I'd carried for years. "Healing isn't about erasing what happened," she said one afternoon. "It's about reclaiming the space it took from you." Slowly, the weight on my chest began to lift. I started sleeping through the night more often. When a door slammed in the hallway, my pulse still jumped, but it settled faster. Hannah visited in October, bringing a framed photo of us from middle school. We sat in my tiny kitchen, eating takeout and laughing until my sides hurt. "You're different," she said quietly. "Lighter." I nodded. "I feel different." News of my father's trial reached me through Lauren. The charges stuck: domestic assault, financial crimes, witness intimidation. He was sentenced to 8 years. His law license was gone. My mother entered rehab, sending me a letter months later. She wrote about her shame, her failures, her desire to change. I read it twice, then set it in the back of a drawer. I wasn't ready to answer. Maybe I never would be. By spring, my first article for the university paper was published. A piece on recognizing early warning signs of abusive relationships. I didn't use my story directly, but every line carried the truth I'd lived. Walking through Washington Square Park after seeing it in print, I realized something. The girl who had once whispered her dreams into a hidden notebook now spoke them aloud, without fear. The scar inside my jaw would never fade, but it no longer felt like a mark of what had been done to me. It was proof of what I'd survived, and what I'd built after. As I crossed the park, the wind carried the smell of rain from somewhere up the street. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling the weight of the flash drive still on its chain beneath my shirt. I didn't need it anymore, but I kept it. Reminder. Not of them. Of me. The me who had walked out that night and never looked back. The me who had learned to breathe again. And in that breath I knew. This was just the beginning.